These right here that you see behind me are the parts that just came back from my performances with the Los Angeles Philharmonic. We're going to actually dive into what these parts ended up looking like. So typically what happens when you have a piece for orchestra is that you write out the score, then you engrave the score in a program like Sibelius or Dorico, and then after that you engrave an entire set of parts for every single member of the orchestra. I actually haven't seen the contents at all. It's completely sealed and taped off. So we're going to be discovering together what the LA Phil musicians thought about the music and what they actually ended up marking in the parts themselves to help them play the music better. Here we go. We're going to try to attempt to open this thing. All right, so let's take this out of the box. I actually haven't seen anything like this before. So this is an envelope. You see right there, it says LA Phil on the bottom there. They have this really fun little plastic or rubber band kind of thing right here. So just kind of open it like this. I'm actually kind of nervous because I haven't seen these at all. Oh, and this is fun. There's this packing slip that the LA Phil actually wrote out. So it actually says all the different parts here. Now this is a huge stack of parts over here. We're not gonna go over every single one in this video, but I'll focus on some of the highlights. Now you'll see that there's not that many pencil markings going on here. I actually just see these two fingerings on the very top of the part, and then occasionally the player would write 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. But you'll see I didn't actually write the fingerings down for the microtones in this particular piece. I heard from some musicians, actually many musicians, that they said that they preferred that they would come up with their own fingerings because every instrument is slightly different and every scenario is slightly different from where they're coming from. And the reason they told me this was because sometimes when you're approaching a microtone, you can't approach it from certain fingerings. You would have to come up with a different fingering to hit that microtone if you're coming from pitch that won't be able to easily make that adjusted fingering. So ever since I had that comment, I let the musicians figure out the quarter tones and the microtones and such, and it's been a lot better because it gives them a little bit more agency about how to approach these particular pitches. So the flute 2 part also has the same 2 pitches, of course, the G half sharp and the C half sharp above the staff. Between the first and second flute part, I already see a discrepancy with how they finger these particular pitches. So even though they're the same exact pitches, the first flute and the second flute are fingering them entirely differently. So this is exactly why I don't put fingerings in parts anymore, because even between 2 flute players that are sitting right next to each other in the same orchestra, they are going to end up using slightly different fingerings because their flutes obviously are different. Here's something I see that's actually quite common. These straight lines that you see at letter K, this indicates where the beats are. I remember the first clarinet player came up to me after rehearsal and suggested that they do the breathing part slightly differently. So at the end of the part here, you actually see a bunch of pencil markings showing the revised version of what his breathing sounds will be. In the third clarinet part, we're seeing some fingerings. At letter H, we have this A half sharp. There's this little fingering that's right above it. Here with the A half sharp, that's 1 octave higher on the next system, this player is saying E flat plus reg. I used to play clarinet, I don't know what that means. This is very cool. So in the contrabassoon part, there are these quarter tonal, kind of like chromatic scale kind of thing. So you'll see that in measure 45, I have D, then C 3/4 sharp, then C half sharp, and C natural. And this particular player is saying that the C 3/4 sharp is going to be the C sharp lipped up. Then the next note is a C half sharp. He's going to play it C sharp lipped down. So it's very clear how this player is approaching it. He's going to do more of an embouchure adjustment. The very next measure, you see B lipped up to do the B half sharp. Instead of having every single note have its own slightly different fingering, this player is saying, no, I'm going to take the normal fingering and then I'm just going to lip it up or down. So the timpani part was kind of interesting because I was using quarter tones in the timpani part as well. So at the very beginning of the part here, you'll see that the timpanist put E, G half sharp, C half sharp, and A. So those indicate the first 4 pitches the player is going to play on the 4 drums. As a composer, one doesn't really need to do this because the timpanist prefers to go through the part and see what are going to be the first 4 pitches he needs and which drums he's going to put those pitches on. The timpanist here put muffle on this particular system. I don't remember why he did this, but again, this is not a note that I said. He heard what else was going on in the orchestra and said, I need to make sure that my sound is slightly different than what a normal timpani sound would be. I didn't have to write that in, which is very cool. That's what happens when you're dealing with a professional orchestra. And you'll see as the part goes on, the most important thing I want to highlight is that he actually would write out what are going to be the new pitches on the drums. So here in the second system of this page, you see E and B. I guess those would be on the left side of his setup. And lo and behold, at letter K, the pitches changed to E and B. All right, now we're heading to the most intense part of this video, which is going to be the strings. I'm very curious what the string players wrote in their parts. Now, big disclaimer here, this particular piece has parts for every single desk of the string section. For example, in the first violins, there are 8 desks, and each desk has 2 players, so that would mean 16 players. So you'll see here, this first part here says violin 1, desk 1. So that means only the first 2 players of the string section play this particular part. The next part you'll see, it says violin 1, desk 2. So these are going to be players 3 and 4, and so on. This is very unusual. Usually for an orchestra, when it says violin 1, all 16 players are going to play from the same part. There might be some divisi here and there, but in general, that's usually what happens. I just kind of went crazy with it. I wanted to experiment and see what I can do if I have 8 different parts going on in the first violin section, and I did this for every single section: the second violins, the violas, the cellos, and the basses. Some of it worked, some of it didn't, but I'm curious to see what the musicians actually wrote in the parts themselves. So let's take a look. So you'll see the first measure here. In the part itself, I put number 1 on the top staff, so that's going to be the first player, and the bottom staff, I put number 2, which is the second player. So this is what we normally call divisi. Now, the players here actually wrote that the first staff here is the outside player, and the second staff here is the inside player. And what that typically means is that the outside player, that's going to be the player that's closer to the audience. The inside player is going to be, of course, the other person on that stand. So they wanted to write that to make that very clear for them. Now, in every single string part you get back from an orchestra, you're going to notice that they have these funny little markings all over the score. These are going to be your up bows and your down bows. An up bow is this kind of V-shaped symbol, which basically just means you take the bow like this and you move it literally up on the string. A down bow looks kind of like this horseshoe sort of thing, and that means to play down bow. So you just take the bow like this and you play literally down on the string. So I want to show you a couple of discrepancies then between what I wrote and what the players did. And this is just something I didn't really notice actually, because there's just so many things going on at one time that I didn't really pay attention to the way they were phrasing each one of these phrases. So if you take a look at measure 40 here, you'll see that I put a slur with these grace notes and the C half sharp main note over here, and then I have this D that's just kind of hanging on its own. They put this slur above the grace notes and the D right here. Now, a slur in terms of string writing means that you play all the notes that are underneath that slur with one bow. So in other words, what I wanted to do was have these 3 notes here, the 2 grace notes, the C half sharp with one bow, and then the D would be on another bow. I didn't care if it was up, down, or down, up. I just wanted them on separate bows. Here, the players actually went against my bowing, and they put all 4 notes under one bow. Now, that's just something that they would typically do. They would do that actually with a lot of just normal canonical repertoire too. It's not something that's just because I did this myself. But I would have been interested if I had more time to see what my actual writing, I guess, would have sounded like, how much clear or less clear would have been if they used my markings, because I wanted to have this kind of more, aggressive kind of touch to the melody where you're bowing more often than having everything slurred. And this is actually happening in a lot of places in my part. So that's interesting. It's just something I didn't really notice until I got the part right in front of me. And just for clarification, by the way, these markings here were not made in a kind of democratic way. They're all made by the first chair player. The first chair player actually would take the part about a month or so before the first performance, and they would go through it, play it on their own, and see what markings they want to put as far as up bows and down bows and as far as slurring. And then what would happen is that the concertmaster would take this part and give it back to the librarian, the one in charge of distributing all the parts to the musicians. And then the librarian would actually take kind of the master copy, so to speak, of the different bowings and write in with pencil by hand all the different bowings in all the parts that have similar music. So it's a very tedious process, and I'm very glad that they do this, because if I had to do this and figure it out, it'd be a big nightmare because I don't play the violin. So now, for example, in the second desk part, you'll see the same exact bowing markings that are in the first desk part. All right, so I just looked at all the violin parts, first violin and second violin, and pretty much they all mimic what the concertmaster did on the first violin desk 1 part. So that's pretty much expected, and that's how you want to make sure the whole string section is unified in what they're doing. Moving on to the viola section, desk 1. So again, the viola would get the concertmaster part from the first violin. They would make sure that whatever similar gestures they have in their part, they're going to mimic those gestures in terms of the bowing. Now again, here at the very beginning of the page, we see the out and the in. So this is something that they wanted to make sure that everybody knew, just like in the first and second violin parts. And just like the violin parts, we see the same kind of bowing structure happening all throughout the piece over here. And now here we have the cello part. So this again is going to have separate desks, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 desks. So that means 10 players on the cello part. I want to actually point out something which I didn't point out before, is that yes, we do have the divisi marking at the very beginning, right, where you have 2 separate staff. But when you want both players to play the same thing, what you need to do is put everything on one staff. So you'll see that here at measure 24. And then at the very top, you'll see that I write UNIS period, which means unison. So that way they know they're going to have to play the same exact lick. Now, when it turns into both players playing different things, as we see here on the next page in measure 75, you go into having 2 staffs and you put DIV period, which means divisi. So they would know exactly what to do. And this is just kind of a little bonus too. I like to put this little kind of deep, thick bracket on the left-hand side. That way they could easily differentiate between stuff that is divisi like this and stuff that is just single line like this, where you don't have any sort of bracket on the left-hand side. Just a small little engraving tip to make the musicians' lives easier. All right, now we're heading into the contrabass part. So there are going to be 8 players, which means we have 4 desks. So again, the concertmaster part would go to the contrabass principal player, and they would make sure that they have kind of similar bowing gestures happening if they have similar music going on. Now the contrabass part is pretty different, I would say, than the concertmaster part. So there's not going to be much overlap, but it's important that they do this kind of thing to make sure all the strings are unified, of course. Here's desk 3. Yeah, so here was a weird case where the page turn didn't quite work too well. So you'll notice that the librarian actually did something interesting here. So take a look at the first page here. At the end of the system, you have this F half sharp that just kind of goes on. And look, the page turn is kind of horrendous. I don't remember what happened there. It must have been just kind of impossible to do a page turn. And what the librarian did, which was actually very nice of them, is they just took this part here, scanned it, and just taped it at the very start of the next page right here. So this makes a lot of sense actually, because this part here at the very beginning is a rest, so they can easily just turn the page and add that piece of music there. I think what happened was that this particular page here, this 9x12 page, can't really fit that top staff that easily. If I was using the 10x13 page paper, which is what a big orchestra like this would typically use, this actually would have been no problem at all. But you see, I had like over 50 parts here, and this is the first time we encountered such a problem. So I think that's pretty good in my book. I'm not going to sweat over that in particular. Great, and we've got to the end of our stack of parts. Now, if you do want to hear this piece, I do have a demo version of it linked right here, rendered through Note Performer 4, which I highly recommend if you use Sibelius or Dorico Finale. And right over here, I actually have another video explaining how I wrote this entire piece of music. So thanks so much for sticking around to the end here, and I'll see you next time. All right, I'm gonna have to clean all this stuff, all this paper on the ground. That's gonna take me all day.